Ready to start. My name is Oleksandr. We are talking about Eastern Partnership after 2020, German perspective of this question, and we will talking about this with our guest Hans-Jürgen HEIMSOETH, a special representative for Eastern Partnership at Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. Cristina GHERASIMOV, research fellow at German Council of Foreign Affairs. Nikolaos GAVALAKIS, director of the Regional Office Dialogue for Eastern Europe of Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and Matija Nelis, Ukraine expert at the Center for Liberal Modernity. So I think the Macron question was one of the most discussed here, but nevertheless, let's have it like a provocative point for our discussion even today. When we are talking about Eastern Partnership, for such countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia who are really interested in cooperating with Europe, when we see the situation when the European Union is not denying but nevertheless delaying this important talks for two countries of Balkans with an initiative from Macron. Is there any incentive for such countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, who are not even starting that still do not have even this accession perspective to the European Union, to take it seriously, such projects like Eastern Partnership? I know that this question might be a little bit provoking, but Mr. HEIMSOETH, I would like you to answer it in first turn.
Well, thank you very much, but maybe let me first also thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm the first time back in Kiev after 7.5 years, having lived here for 4 years, and I'm really happy to see some very positive developments going on also in the town. If you go on foot, it's much easier nowadays. Cars are not standing everywhere, and a lot of building going on. So I'm so happy Ukraine had such a difficult time. We very often tend to forget that it's a country which is forced sort of into a war. At least in most European countries, this is not thought about. So it really inspires confidence if you see how Ukraine is developing, even taking into account these difficulties. Now, of course, Eastern Partnership and comparing Western Balkans, I would really be careful about that. Eastern Partnership, of course, our view is that it is there to help the countries with European aspirations to become more prosper, to keep the stability, and to develop its relations with the European Union. And if I look back, in the last 10 years, this has been an enormous success. And those who say no might have had completely other expectations, and it's always about expectation management. But I do see great differences. We have the association agreements. Some countries have visa-free regimes. The EU is now known everywhere. It was not known in Armenia 10 years ago. All this is great. So, is it still of interest? I think it should stay of interest because even today, all 6 countries still have great problems. Not only are there the deliverables which were written down, and there are still really great problems in good governance, in rule of law, and corruption, and so you know it all. I don't have to repeat it. But we also have to take into account the problems, at least I see. We see ease of doing business going up also in these countries, but still investments coming from the European Union are low. We see a migration which is dangerous for some of the Eastern Partnership countries. As also a question we have to address. We have a question also of good governance, where the European Union can only partly help because, let's say, when it comes then to corruption and things, there are so many vested interests. And of course, there are societies which are becoming more and more democratic, I would say all of them, and helping them along. So, of course, if you just only start from the becoming a member of the EU perspective, maybe you could say it's disappointing. But I think that is, let's say, not the point we are today, and there's so much to be done, and I am very happy we have the Eastern Partnership.
But Mr. HEIMSOETH, I would like to ask a second question then. Every political science student, especially those who study European studies, they know this tale about carrot and stick, that European Union is somehow using to guide countries of Eastern Partnership, countries of or Western Balkan, to be more democratic, more economically developed, etc., etc., etc. For Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, the association agreement and free trade agreement was those carrots that helped European Union to do all these necessary things. Which carrots and sticks do Brussels have now, do you think?
Well, I think there are a lot of carrots anyway, because, let's say, EU is interesting in so many respects. People want to be part of the services situation, get rid of roaming charges. There are so many sectors of the European Union where you could imagine sectoral approaches of the countries. I think really you go into a sort of in a one-way road if you only take the one issue of membership, because we are in a new situation now. Are we in a situation today that it is more difficult? And we need 27 members of the EU to agree on some things, and well, we see it is becoming more difficult. So I think we should take the step-by-step approach.
Thank you. Ms. Gerasimov, I would like to ask you the further question. Moldova probably is a good example for Ukraine, for those political developments. Somehow it's a step further. So it was earlier with the association agreement, it was earlier with the visa-free regime with the European Union. How do you think, does it work for Moldova now, or everything that Mr. HEIMSOETH is telling us about?
Thank you for the question. I will answer this question by reverting to your initial question. I think it's important to understand what does the European Union mean for the Eastern Partnership countries. And the way how we see it now, it's a stazioni termini, as Italians used to say. And I think that's a wrong approach, because just getting into the EU doesn't ensure a lot of the transformational goals that these countries have set for themselves. So I think from this perspective, what the Eastern Partnership countries should do is to take this road, of European integration as a process focused on themselves, first of all, rather than on the end goal of becoming members of the European Union. From this perspective, I think it's a more sustainable and less reversible approach to democratization and transformation in the region. If we just want to get there, if Moldova wants to get there, without really focusing on the process, this could easily be reversible even within the EU. And I think we have great examples, unfortunately, in the European Union today that show that the process is important. For Moldova, that has been zigzagging not only in the last 10 years, but in the last 30 years, I think this is very reflective in a way. When governments will be focusing on addressing the needs of the citizens and to use the association agreement, to use the DCFTA to improve the lives of the ordinary citizens rather than of certain elites or segments of society, that is the right sustainable approach to looking forward for a EU membership perspective. And I think what happened most recently in June, when we had a pro-reformist government in place, I think the EU's immediate readiness to support, immediate readiness to disburse financial support is a very clear example that when reforms are taken genuinely on the ground in the Eastern Partnership countries, there will be a EU perspective in the future.
But when you're talking about this process orientation, so to say, how can we measure process of progress, so to say, when we are talking about this European perspective of these countries? I think it's not only important for the bureaucrats, but for the general public as well. For me as a journalist, it's always easier to write about something that is achieved than about this process of something abstract being more European. You know, we have to explain our audience what is Eastern Europe Partnership about. What do we achieve because of it? Could you explain how can we somehow make this process orientation easily understandable, so to say, for the general public, for journalists who always want to make it simpler than it is, but nevertheless we have to do it?
I'm sorry to disappoint, but I don't have an answer to that question. I will try to elaborate, the thinking behind it. I think we always look for easy shortcuts, and it's normal, but I think any transformational process is a very, very complicated endeavor. It's time, to reconsider our narrative about democratization, about transformation in the region, something that most of the Eastern Partnership countries did not have a chance to think about in the early 1990s, because there were immediate, survival type of questions: how to build a state, how to make sure you have something on the plate. But I think we have moved on from that point, but we never really, the Eastern Partnership societies have never really had a process of societal reflection. Who are we and where are we going? And it's a difficult story because there are different views. Most of them, even though the segment of the population that is pro-European is constantly growing, there are still segments of societies that look eastward, and I don't think that they need to be easily discarded. They are part of these societies. They need to be considered, and I think it's not the EU's or Germany's responsibility to deal with this societal dialogue that needs to take place at local level. So I think, you know, maybe I have a very radical view from the views here on the ground, but it seems to me that this should be a nationally driven dialogue first.
But we have to drive it probably, because sitting here in the hotel discussing this between coffee breaks, it's really nice for us. But for those who live there, so to say, ordinary lives, I think they have to understand what is the issue for them in all these things that politicians, journalists are telling them about. Because abstract things are really good, but if Eastern Partnership is not easily understood by those people, it's of course a problem, because this, I think, it's my hypothesis, of course, but I think that the Maidan movement here in Ukraine was possible only because we have this very, very concrete thing, association agreement, that was denied by Yanukovych, and this is something that the society could focus on. And is there any point, do you think, that Moldovan, Ukrainian, Georgian society now can focus on in their process of this Europeization, so to say?
Of course. I think the fact that all of these three countries have an association agreement, have DCFTAs, these are tremendous opportunities that many other countries would like to have in place. And at this moment, the potential is really unlocked of these agreements. And I think focusing on the implementation of the association agreements is a very good start for, also delivering the goods of the DCFTAs to the regular ordinary citizens. So having a communication strategy at national level, of course at the EU level, it's also very important that it has to be also a cooperative approach. But still, I think communications should start at home about what are the advantages and why do we need to implement them.
Mr. Gavalakis, in year 2017, you wrote that it was a good decision for the European Union not to grant Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia this membership perspective. Are you still think in that way?
Absolutely. I'm aware that especially in Kiev, is not the most popular opinion. But coming back to your carrot argument, what I said in the article is, of course, having a carrot is a good thing, but if the carrot is unreachable for the actor, then it leads to frustration. And we could see this in the case of Turkey, where the European Union, some countries at least, gave Turkey hope for EU membership. In reality, it was never been close to realistic that Turkey could become a member of the European Union. And then what you could see is frustration of on both sides, on the side of the European Union and on Turkey as well. And if you look at the situation from the point of the European Union, you could see it now with Macron's acting with the membership of the Balkan states, is that the European Union right now is definitely not ready to enlarge more. They're just not. The citizens of the European Union are not ready for greater enlargement. All the polls say that. So from a European perspective, this wouldn't be a good decision right now. If you look at the countries, and Mr. HEIMSOETH said that there are frightening developments in a lot of the countries. So the countries are not ready to join the EU, not now, and in my opinion, not in the next years. And so you have to come to an honest assessment and say, right now, this is completely unrealistic. In general, me personally, I'm very positive concerning concerning EU membership of, let's say, Ukraine on a personal level, right? I'm all for that if Ukraine is ready to join, but I don't see that it will be ready in the next, let's say 10 years. Having said that, it's a right decision of the European countries to not give the three countries further hope for now. On the other side, there is always a membership perspective in the treaties of the European Union. The treaties say if the countries are ready concerning democratic issues, rule of law, if they fulfill all those standards, of course they can ask to be a member of the European Union, and I'm quite sure if they do, in this case, the European Union wouldn't say no.
But do you think that Eastern Partnership is, so to say, enough for all these countries as this instrument of Europeization from this perspective?
I mean, the tricky question is, you basically said it. All the carrots are exhausted now. Beyond, if you don't go to offering membership, so is there something between? And I don't think there is anything between which is a big thing. Of course, you can have cooperation beyond offering membership. Mr. HEIMSOETH offered a few opportunities. You have like digitalization. You definitely have the field of environment, which is we all seen a few weeks ago the huge smog cloud here in Kiev. Environment is a big issue, so you have a lot of room for cooperation there. You have labor standards which should be fulfilled by the countries and are not so far. So there is a lot of room of cooperation, but there is, unfortunately, right now we already have in the case of three countries visa-free regime, and there is nothing in between.
Mr. Nellis, may I ask you about you wrote about Zelensky, about his statements. He is so pro-European. But he and his colleagues are saying that they are basing their policies on the sociological issues. So if people support something, they move this agenda. If they do not support, they forget about it. Do you think that Zelensky is able to sell, so to say, pro-European agenda now, when in this European Eastern Partnership framework, not in the framework as Poroshenko was trying to sell when he told about we are moving to European Union, we will knock on this door even if nobody answers, etc., etc. Is there any room for pro-European policies in Ukraine now, so to say?
Again, thanks for having me. For those of you who don't know the Center for Liberal Modernity, we are a bipartisan think tank, and I just wanted to say that we strongly believe in differentiation, and I will come back to your question. So the organizers put it very well to have the associated countries organize themselves, and we also at the center have a project on that, which my colleague is leading. And you have steered us a little bit into a gridlock by focusing on the membership perspective. So you asked me about Zelensky, but I want to take a step back and say that I'm a student of Tanja Börzel, so I know very well of conditionality and Europeanization, but I want to say that we at the center believe in a European perspective of the associated countries, being fully aware that it is politically not feasible. So you have to find, and this is in the direction of Nikki, we have to find something in between. And this is the art, leaving the high politics aside and finding incentives, maybe sectoral ones, in advancing Europeanization of Ukraine. So I just wanted to add that if we focus too much on the membership perspective, we'll just get into the gridlock, because the panel is called View from Berlin. And the honest answer is Berlin doesn't support membership perspective at the moment. This is the honest answer, despite what we wish. So we have to find something in between. And now you ask about Zelensky. again, it's for the Ukrainians to decide where to go. The European course is enshrined now in your constitution, and I think that there were high fears of Zelensky kind of reversing the pro-European course of Poroshenko and the previous government. And so far, the results are mixed, but as viewed from Berlin, it seems that his government is continuing a pro-European course. We had Mr. Kuleba here on the panel 2 days ago, who advocated for basically 3 things: ambition, differentiation, and interconnectivity. And I think these are good things. And now I want to reconnect that again with Berlin, because my analysis, our analysis and understanding is that ambition for advancing the Eastern Partnership in Berlin is mixed. So, Mr. Heim, I want to provoke a debate here. Mr. Heimsoeth said there are ways of looking forward, and there are high expectations by Eastern European countries on Germany, right? Our EU presidency has created this hope that in the second half of 2020 there will be breakthroughs. And this panel also symbolizes it, that you have high hopes. But the honest answer again is, if you ask the German officials, they're very skeptical of differentiation, very skeptical. So we are trying to push it forward, but you have to find ways of institutionalized ways of advancing, cooperation between the 3 associated countries, because the Germans are skeptical in creating. This is Mr. Heimsoeth is probably going to reply to that, but they're very skeptical of institutionalized differentiation. So again, the art of the deal, as Donald Trump would put it, is to find something in between. How to advance and find smaller carrots for reforms in the 3 countries. Yeah, I have many more points, but I want to leave it at that.
I think we have to ask Mr. Heimsoeth about, are German officials skeptical about differentiation?
Well, first you led us into your journalistic problems of having tangible, visible results. Of course, we had visible results with the visas. But that was not something which came just like that. When I was here, we brought a piece of the Berlin Wall because we are for free Europe. I was very criticized. We have visas and you bring it here, how dare you, and so on. 6 years later, we have a visa liberalization. And that was very tangible for the population. Now, of course, you don't have this every year. And I think what you also have to see, Ukraine is not a rabbit or a horse loving carrots. It's 46 million people who, to their big majority, have European aspirations, and that's already very good. So they will not vote for a government which says, I want to go in the other way. So it's up to them to speak with their governments. And then I think there are small, really important things which will be visible. I think we should stop speaking about membership. We should speak about integration. And integration can be done in sectoral ways, as a single digital market or other things where we have to, but it has to be demand-driven, where the member states look, what is actually a field of the European market where we could chop in, where we can really come to the level that it would be possible. So when it comes to differentiation, I agree that we are no friends of 3+3 or 3 countries now integrating quicker because too much goes on in this region, and we just saw it in Moldova. You can't really say how it goes. I think it should be every country has to see where in the framework of its association agreement additional sectoral cooperation is possible. This is something which has to be demand-driven on the basis of the bilateral agreements, and also that some of the deliverables of the Eastern Partnership have been achieved. Now, looking beyond, I think when this panel was thought about, you still had the idea of Germany's presidency in the European Union having the summit. It was decided otherwise. The summit will take place during the Croatian presidency, before the German presidency. And so we now have to start thinking, how do we best fit in, and how do we get things going after the meetings during the Croatian presidency. So we will have first a foreign ministers meeting, the Eastern Partnership preparing the summit of the Croatian presidency. And of course, we are now reading attentively the 50 or more inputs given into the structured process of the European Union for the Eastern Partnership, to see in which areas can we follow up then, where can it go ahead, and we have to take into account what does the new European Commission want. We know green, question of environment, climate is going to be very issue. We can't leave out what the European Commission wants. We surely want to focus also on the economy, because this is the basis of prosperity. And people to people, so contacts young people especially, but not only. So this is, let's say, what we are working.
Mr. HEIMSOETH, I want a further question, but you told that a lot is going on in the region, and it's probably better to work on bilateral basis sometimes. But what is their spur for the Eastern Partnership, for the German perspective? Actually, we are coming to our question that we have to answer today.
Well, I spoke about problems I see in actually all countries still. One is a lack of foreign investment, even though the, let's say, the basics are better than 10 years ago. So can an investment agency help? Is that enough, or what can we do? Problem of good governance. Here we are thinking along the lines of public administration academy, which of the EU for the Eastern Partnership countries, because I see Ukraine is really not the biggest problem or question mark, but question of good administrative capacities is so important. If you want to transform the country, if you want to reform the country, you need good administrators. Yes, and maybe some institutionalized office for youth exchange. These could be some, hard facts and institutions. And once you've worked as long as I have with the European Union, you can see how important that is, because it stays. It doesn't go, it doesn't change with every government. Also, the European Union, once it starts a process, it's slow, it's cumbersome, but it is there, and that is also the big achievement of the Eastern Partnership. It's on the agenda of the European Union, and I think this is a good signal to all these countries.
Mr. Nikolaos, it looks like you have a remark. May I ask you to hand the microphone? Thank you so much.
Just wanted to add one point. So in a way, our summary of the current German policy vis-a-vis the next 10 years of the Eastern Partnership is not more for more, but a little bit like more of the same in the incremental changes. And the main question I have, and it's okay to debate this, the EP of the past 10 years reflected another completely different situation. And I agree, we came far. But the unaddressed question so far on this panel is also the security component or the geopolitical context in which we are now. So one of the questions which I hope, not just this panel, but the EP looking forward will and should address is the security component. We just had a panel previously, and it's unrealistic to assume that there will be German boots on the ground in Georgia or Ukraine. No, forget it. But the dialogue about it, what in the realm of soft security, hybrid threats, propaganda, cyber. These are fields where I think that the EP should include looking forward, and we addressed it during the conference. So I hope that other countries nudge us going further. And lastly, Ursula von der Leyen, in her speech addressing more North Macedonia, and I don't want to come back to the membership perspective, but she said if we don't give Macedonia and Albania a perspective at our side, they will fall back into a geopolitical gray zone. And I think that if the EP doesn't reflect adequately the needs of all the 6 countries, we risk backslides, and we potentially even here in Ukraine risk Ukraine sliding back. So I hope that the revision will also include crucial components like security.
Ms. GHERASIMOV, I would like to ask you: is it really possible to address so different issues for so different countries in the framework of Eastern Partnership?
Okay, I will take this question, but first I want to engage with the question that Mattia posed. I think it's important to have a bit of a discussion beyond the no membership perspective. And here, again, I agree with the ambassador that you pushed us in a corner, you know, to discuss this no membership perspective. But I think it's important to look also at the glass as half full rather than half empty, and that was my initial attempt that I didn't manage probably to convey. So what I wanted to note here is that while Germany definitely at the moment does not see a potential perspective for membership for these countries, it is very much willing to work in a coalition of the willing with other member states who are willing to drive forward the Eastern Partnership format, and it already does so, and in various formats. And here, you know, Germany is helped in a way to also frame its vision for a neue Ostpolitik, which is currently still under development, under construction. But what I'm saying is that there is openness and willingness to work with countries who want to who want to move the Eastern Partnership beyond where we are now. Germany also clearly understands the strategic importance of this neighborhood, both for the European security and for the stability of the neighborhood at the same time. So I think there is no doubt about that. And finally, though it's more the pessimistic voices that come out on Eastern membership or Eastern Partnership membership perspective, there are voices at the level of domestic politics that are actually advocating for a membership perspective, even at times when Macron is definitely interested in focusing on deepening rather than enlargement. So I think from this perspective, there is a double way to look at it. How much the Eastern Partnership countries are able to use these, sparkles that actually exist in German politics and German society does not depend only on the domestic scene in Germany, but also depends a lot on what goes on here. And I would have to move back to my initial argument that what is necessary is to see democratic, sustainable change here on the ground by focusing on these very, very difficult reforms such as the rule of law and anti-corruption mechanisms. Also, there is need for a constructive approach in dialogue with the European Union towards understanding the European reality and existing constraints on how the EU operates and how it sets priorities for the short-term, medium-term, and long-term visions. And the European level reality is as complex as what happens in societies here these days. And it's very important to embed our understanding of membership desires in what happens at the EU level. Also, very unfortunate, I would say, we hear, these voices that also here an example would be Moldova. I will not, reflect on the other countries where blackmailing is used, as a card for certain governments to push the EU to be more proactive, because otherwise it will turn east. I think this is not a constructive approach at all, and we have to give up on that. What is needed is, to wait for the next momentum to come, but in a prepared way. We have to have prepared societies, prepared economies, and preparing elites for that momentum once it arrives. And one final point here on the Eastern Partnership format and this need for, or no need for differentiation. I think it's already a fact, and we live in the reality of a multi-speed Eastern Partnership. We have 3 partner countries with visa-free regimes, association agreements, DCFTAs. And obviously the next years to come will be very much defined by these existing already instruments that are in use. At the same time, we have Armenia somewhere catching up or in between, and we also have 2 other member states who are interested in closer ties to the EU, but by no means a EU membership perspective. So, when we speak about differentiation, it's already on the ground, it's already happening, and from this perspective, I think it's, I don't see this as a question that we need to answer right now. The Eastern Partnership format, the 6 or the 3+3, is actually in the Eastern Partnership countries' advantage, I think, because it gives them a much stronger leverage on the EU's very, very heavy agenda these days. So by sticking together and by prioritizing the multilateral track, their leverage to be considered as an item on the agenda is much higher than to go bilaterally. So from this perspective, I think it's very important to look at it also from this perspective at the role and the added value of the Eastern Partnership today.
I'm totally agree about not forgetting, but nevertheless putting apart this membership talk. It just was a starting point, nothing more. Just not to think that I want to blackmail anybody here to grant Ukraine membership perspective tomorrow. But from the perspective of the political scientist, it sounds very good, because really joint effort to of this 6th country to negotiate with the European Union is always better than the single effort of Kiev or Chisinau or Tbilisi. But do you really believe that this different 6 countries, can Armenia and Ukraine agree on which points they could agree in the Eastern Partnership format? What can be done by these countries together? Because I see these countries as very, very different in many ways.
5 out of 6 have a conflict, frozen conflict on their territories. Why not to start a thematic discussion that would, build on experiences, best practices, failed practices, and see what could be common ways to push a common agenda at the EU level.
Do you really believe that Azerbaijan and Armenia could start such a discussion together?
No, but this is something that we should think, at least in certain, I don't say, all 6 countries or all 5 countries have to sit at the table, but you have to find thematic common issues between 2, 3, 4, or 6 that could unite, on certain common strategic interests, and then sit together at the table and talk. So yes, maybe that wasn't the best example that I gave, I agree, but what I wanted to say is that all 6 countries can find common issues to work together on.
Mr. Gavalakis, I would like you to move back to Germany. What Germany do you think? So we have the position of the representative of MFA, but really, what is Eastern Partnership for Germany, and what it will be for Germany after 2020? Do you think?
Excellent question. I mean, when I was on the metro here, I already had the feeling that this panel will be mainly about membership perspective. So maybe it's good to move away from that. I mean, I can't speak for the German government. I'm the director of the regional office of the German political foundation here in Kiev, and I could just offer what, from our point of view, is an important step for the future of the Eastern Partnership. You mentioned in one of your previous questions that the Eastern Partnership is kind of an elite project, and it's difficult for the ordinary citizen to really feel it, what's going on. And I mean, people from civil society, from administrative level, from politics, of course, they come together in those events, they speak to each other, everyone knows what's going on, but the ordinary people, they don't. And it's necessary to make the Eastern Partnership attractive, not just for the countries, but for the people of the countries. And in our view, this starts with social issues. You could see what happened here in Ukraine when the previous president was running a election campaign more on issues based on identity, and I had the feeling that the general population, basically outside of Kiev, their number one is goal to have a better life, to improve their quality of life, and I think this is the main point. The association agreements in this regard, they which are basic, they have a lot of excellent chapters, by the way. They offer a lot on the social dimension, right? On employees' rights, on workers' rights. And unfortunately, we brought up and published a study this week, and I was just coming back from Brussels where we presented it. The workers in the region, they do not benefit from the association agreements this far at all, right? So there was a wonderful report coming out by Open Democracy at the beginning of the year. It's called Building on Bones, and it just depicts a horrible situation on Ukrainian construction sites, where there are basically no safety measures, and a lot of workers dying there every year. So what we did, we assembled a group of experts from civil society, from the trade unions, from academia, and we discussed what are the most pressing issues on the social sector, and came up that first and foremost labor inspections have to be introduced in the countries. There are or the countries committed themselves to those inspections in the association agreements, but they are not fulfilling any of this. The second point is that there is still huge instances of discrimination going on in the workplace, and the third point is that there's not really a social dialogue happening. So some negotiating process between employees and employers, what we basically have in Germany. So in Germany, employers and employees sit down if they have a problem about wages, etc. And if they don't come to a conclusion, then the employees might strike. In Georgia, for example, it's often that the employees have to go to strike in order to catch the attention of the employer so they can start negotiations. And of course, this is not just a social issue, this has a lot of bad effects for the economy as well.
Thank you, but Mr. Nellis, do you really believe that after 2, 2020, there is really perspective for Eastern Partnership, or it will be just a summit, so to say, for those 6 countries where it will be possible for them to negotiate ad hoc some treaties or some issues in the sector they're interested in, what Mr. HEIMSOETH already have told us about. For example, it will be interesting for Ukraine to work on cybersecurity, and for Armenia on, I don't know, visa travel regime, and they will discuss separately or with European Union these questions. Or it will be really something in common for these countries and European Union that they can achieve together.
So beyond 2020, of course, there will be an EAP, yeah? And I think that it's important that Ukraine, who is much more ambitious than Azerbaijan, which is an authoritarian dictatorship, of course, you think that being together in such a group, nothing can be achieved. This is the pessimistic view, and I think, well, you can use the instruments, despite not having shared interest with Azerbaijan, to get something out of this. So Cristina was alluding to that bandwagoning, speaking with one voice. Of course, you can't speak on most of the issues on one voice with Azerbaijan, but the 3 countries, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, can come to Brussels summit speaking with one voice. And this hasn't yet fully happened. And Prestaiko recently alluded to the fact that this is a priority for the Ukrainian government to seek more coordination among the 3. This is one, even if it's not formalized as part of the Eastern Partnership, at least come to the summits with one voice. And then again, looking forward, I hope, I mean, Mr. HEIMSOETH was alluding to that there will be new elements of the Eastern Partnership. And yesterday we heard from Luba that even the current association agreement and DCFTA are only partially enforced. So we have to kind of think about, even when we think about new things, we also have to look at the old agreements and think how we can advance them beyond agriculture, beyond approximation of technical standards. So how can we nudge people and bureaucrats to do that? This is an open question. We have to find incentives and also sticks, like the EU is doing in anti-corruption. I think conditioning aid and macro-financial assistance to certain things, I think the EU should be looking forward, learn from this experience in Ukraine and apply to Moldova, which it has done also in the past, but apply conditionality more broader. And then, of course, we have to see what new elements will be there in the Eastern Partnership. Are they really what Ukraine needs? Is Ukraine now, is it crucial for Ukraine to speak about environmental rights or labor rights? I hope it is, but there are other issues. So the instruments need to reflect the needs of the participants, and it's up for us, for the Eastern Partnership countries, to see whether the negotiations will deliver in the next half a year and a year. So it remains to be seen.
Thank you. We have only 10 minutes, I think. If there are any questions, Gleb, you're welcome.
Thank you, Gleb Vyshlinsky, Center for Economic Strategy, Kyiv. There is the spirit of another person is in this empty white chair on the panel, and this person is Igor Kolomoisky, who recently said in the interview to New York Times, "You all won't take us in," he said in the interview, "there is no use in wasting time on empty talk, whereas Russia would love to bring us into the new Warsaw Pact." Like what you were saying, like speaking about reality, is like very good support to his idea of going back into Russian sphere of influence, and I'm sure a lot of people in Germany will be happy about it, like because of like some historical spirit of guilt that was formed by the Soviet Union, the guilt to Russian population, not to Ukrainian, while like both countries were fighting in the war. But like tomorrow, like less emotional, I won't speak as an economist. Like when like these issues of like membership perspective, hope, etc., are discussed in like some vacuum. Like you look on this as a sort of like political exercise. It looks nice, but you need to look on economic reality. Yesterday, like there was a very good saying, I don't recall who was speaking about it, that like either European Union and Ukraine treat themselves as partners, or they treat themselves as economic competitors. And like what representative of European External Action Service was speaking about yesterday was like, I had a feeling that European Union still treats Ukraine as a competitor. And like we could look on a very good example with Poland that shows that like we are certainly not an equal like competitors. So like in 15 years, Poland received over 160 billion euros in financial aid from the European Union, which is a part of the single market. And like some panelists were speaking about no reason in any intermediate solutions on the way to membership, like I understand including the single market for goods, that could increase competitiveness of Ukrainian economy. And as a result, like we have 1 million Ukrainians working in Poland, because certainly like productivity in the country with such higher investment, both public of the EU and private, is much higher, and wages could be simultaneously much higher. So like if we are losing like the most economically active population because of like, for example, Polish government competing for our labor force, blocking Ukrainian exports via not providing not enough road permits, then like there will be no other option for the Ukrainian population to turn back from the European Union and to look back to Russia, because like what will be rational reasons to believe European Union, especially if even the smartest panelists on this panel are saying that please do not think about even hope, like not the formal perspective, but even hope could be counterproductive. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm sorry for going back to membership perspective, but nevertheless, Mr. HEIMSOETH, are you not afraid of Kolomoisky's spirit here in the room?
Well, I'm very happy that Ukraine really is a profoundly democratic country. I've not seen Mr. Kolomoisky on any election list, and he should go and run a campaign with his ideas. I don't think he will have many votes, and so I don't take this serious. I do take the factor serious, and I think it is one of the most serious for the government to take into account. Of course, we have the question of Russia. We have Macron. We have the question how the relations with Russia can be formed, which is really a very difficult question. Cristina spoke of Ostpolitik. What we think is we need a European position, a European policy towards the East together, and not sort of one-man shows. When it comes to the question of partner or competitor, Germany sees Ukraine not as a competitor. We have big industrial investments here. The whole German thinking goes on that it is always a win-win situation. What would we have said of Poland or Czech Republic getting into the European Union? We are so intertwined in the meantime economically, and it's good for Germany, and it's good for Poland, it's good for Czechoslovakia, and the same would be true for Ukraine when the integration of the economies go ahead. And I didn't understand our discussion yesterday, so that the EEAS sees Ukraine as a competitor. But it is a question of trust. And we do not believe yet that we can take any sort of every Ukrainian agency as non-corrupt. And this is really, we come back always to the same questions, and here we have not seen very much delivered. A lot of good words, but we need concrete proof. I think, coming back to some other discussions going on here, that such discussions as here, multilateral, of some of the groups of the Eastern Partnership or of all, are very useful. But they should not only be on panels, they should be really digging down, benchmarking on the association agreements. Where have we really had progress? And also of cooperating in the relations to the European Union, and I have no problem with that. It is, of course, EU is a difficult negotiation partner. You have to team up. You have to come with good arguments and with results. Thank you.
Does anybody want to elaborate on this question as well, or?
Very briefly on Kolomoisky, I mean, he finally came out. As we know, he only cares about himself. So it was Yanukovych who was bought by 15 billion in 2013, and I think Kolomoisky even put a price tag about 100 billion. And so he's after himself. He's just pursuing his own narrow interests. And in the meantime, Ukraine and the other countries that want more, and this is my advice, our advice, have to prepare for a medium and long-term environment which is very hostile to it. Yeah, we have our allies perceive the EU as a competitor, very obviously. So I don't think that Germany views Ukraine as a competitor, but prepare yourself and at least demand in the group of three that the Copenhagen criteria are upheld. Demand a European perspective without explicitly getting the membership perspective in the documents. And try, and this is the last advice, try to present yourselves. Mrs. Serkal was saying it yesterday, present yourself to the European public, because in Germany, people know nearly nothing about Ukraine. So have an elaborate soft power strategy in the key capitals, and then prepare yourself for a medium and long-term strategy. So when the time is ripe, knock on the doors in a much better condition than you're in now.
I think we have time for one more question, and I thought that you wanted to ask it.
So I would not want to prolong the discussion. I will try to be very brief because I already had this opportunity to be a panelist. I would not bring back this membership issue. However, I would say that we should not talking about the membership because exactly for the reason that it helps the integration. But it's not about taking decision now of taking new members. By the way, when I talked to German ambassador in Tbilisi, he's relieved because he's free now to talk about the membership perspective. And why? Because it was Angela Merkel when she visited Georgia fair recently, a few months ago, when she said that next part after Western Balkan countries become member of the European Union could be Ukraine and Georgia. At that time she didn't mention Moldova, but I think she meant Moldova as well. On the visibility issue, I think it should not be interpreted, which was not, but what I just want to say is that it should not be over-dramatized that EAP does not have the visibility. What should be a priority, the EU to have the visibility in our countries, I mean in the Eastern Partnership countries, and when it comes to the countries of the European Union, of course there should be a visibility about the cooperation, about the countries, those countries per se who are represented in the Eastern Partnership, because Eastern Partnership, after all, it's one of the instruments of the, important though, but still one of the instruments of dealing with those countries. And I also wanted to quickly to say about the differentiation. I fully agree with Cristina. The differentiation is there. It's being recognized already by the European Union in its Brussels Summit declaration, in its recent, short questionnaire, what was sent to the partner countries. It may not be, you may not be very happy to see the formalized structures of the differentiation. However, it will come alongside the substance, what is being developed among partner countries, among the countries of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. So let us not be afraid. Let us support, the cooperation between those who want to cooperate more among themselves.
I think it was a statement, not a question.
Sorry for that.
No problem at all. I will use this time. Let's make a short take-home statement for every speaker, I think, starting from Mr. GAVALAKIS. 30 seconds. What do you want to say us about Eastern Partnership, Germany, 2020?
Eastern Partnership has a good structure. It has provided results so far. It's on a good path, depending from where you're coming from, what your expectations are. But I think is what it can deliver, it delivers. But it has to be more bold on the social field. It has to bring tangible results on the social field where ordinary citizens can feel this Eastern Partnership is positive for them. That it's not just a project for elites, for experts where they meet each other twice a year and talk about everything which concerns the citizens, but the citizens do not feel at all.
Thank you. Ms. GHERASIMOV, your turn.
It's okay. Yeah, in 2 sentences, it's difficult, but I think Eastern Partnership is definitely there to stay. There is full support on behalf of Germany for it to continue. It's not the moment, in this very difficult times domestically, but also internationally, from a foreign policy perspective for the Germany to prioritize the Eastern Partnership. But it is supporting already, this coalition of the willings that I was talking about, who are interested to move the Eastern Partnership forward. And I think this is an opportunity for the countries to also form a common statement, at least among the 3 ones, at governmental level, to also share what their expectations are deriving from the existing international context at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. HEIMSOETH.
3 main points. One is, first we have now to look into the input of the structured cooperation process to get a good paper from the European Commission, which sets new marks, which helps the Eastern Partnership countries and the problems they have. I named them: economy, migration, exchange, and so on. Second question, inclusiveness versus differentiation. We have to be open for exploring additional sectoral cooperation when progress has been made with the DCFTAs and the deliverables. This should be demand-driven by the countries with the proposal of concrete measures. And third, I think much more attention should be paid by the Eastern Partnership countries to the multilateral aspect, and they should get together much more often on benchmarking and seeing where they are, where they can learn from one another on good governance, on other issues we spoke about. And I'm quite positive and confident that we will speak about Eastern Partnership also in 2030.
It will be nice to meet you in 5 years. Mr. Nellis.
Yes, very briefly. I think one of the main takeaways from the discussion is that there's little radical mood for innovation within the EU or within Germany, within the official circles. I think Luc Devine said yesterday, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I recommend... Yeah, Germany wants more incremental change. So my strong advice is to the EAP countries that want more, again, speak with one voice and approach Germany and the EU with specific tools and formats. I think the strategy has the highest success. And again, European Union has a limited attention span. Germany has many problems. So only if you bandwagon will you get the sufficient attention you desire.
I think that's it. thank you, dear speakers, and I won't waste your time anymore. Coffee break.